So greetings, everyone. Hello. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is GABBY CUDJOE, and I'm so excited to introduce all of you to the brand new online forum hosted by the Millennial Womanist project called Womanist Taught Us. And so this is an opportunity where we are going to be speaking to womanists across disciplines, across the diaspora, whose work we want to learn from, who have served as models in varying areas in different fields. And so we invite you to join us monthly for this. And today is our very first online forum. And so again, my name is GABBY. I am a minister and a theologian, and I just love the work of this woman that we are going to be talking to today. My emphasis is on faith and culture and the arts, and I'm just so excited. So I'm going to get out of the way so that my co-host can introduce herself and so that we can get into this. So again, thank you for joining us. Give us 45 minutes and you will be happy that you came.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is ESTEE NENA DILLARD, and I am excited to be co-hosting this initiative with GABBY and the Millennial Womanist Project. So I actually am going to allow our guest, Dr. Velda, to introduce herself. So Dr. Velda, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you both GABBY and ESTEE for the invitation. I'm excited to be with you via technology. It's always good to have a conversation across generations. I'm located in Cleveland, Ohio. I'm originally from Chicago, Illinois. And so I'm working with the United Church of Christ as the minister for racial justice. And I come to this work because God has called me. And I'm passionate about, I've always been passionate about social justice, but I've also been integrated into racial justice because I really do understand the ways in which the myths of our ancestors and African descended people has been marginalized, and ways in which supremacy has created this space where we are struggling still to be who we were called to be. But just excited to be here and excited for what this conversation will hold.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Dr. Velda. And we're excited to have you. Certainly in your position, in your experience, and with your level of research, I know this is going to be an exciting conversation. So I'm going to start us off by allowing us to jump right in with the first question. So we would like to know, what was your first experience with womanism? And how have you seen the discipline, the experience evolve since its inception?
So my first experience, I was a member of Trinity United Church of Christ in Chicago. And I joined Trinity in 1986. And at that time, the Reverend Dr. Jeremiah A. Wright Jr. was senior pastor. I was looking for a church home where women were in leadership. I come from a long line of strong women, and at the age of 5, I was in a Baptist church in Chicago, and I couldn't quite understand why women were nurses and ushers and not pastors. And at that moment, I decided that I did not ever want to be part of a church growing up where women were not in the pulpit and leading the charge. Because as I was growing up watching the civil rights movement, it was women behind the scenes. It was mainly women sitting in the church. It was, if it wasn't for the women as part of this movement. And so womanism came to me through Trinity. My first introduction was Renita Weems. So I'm doing a little showing off here, got all the books here, and just wanted to just highlight that. And she would come to the church. It was the pulpit that Jeremiah offered was open, and it was open to scholarship and intellectualism and African-centered pedagogy and theology. And so being out of the Black liberation tradition and being introduced to womanism, I was excited because I knew that women had a role in shaping our lives around the issues of spirituality, theology, ethics, anthropology, science, whatever field that we endeavor to be in, a womanist or women, especially Black women, were meant to be there. And so it was Renita Weems, it was Vashti McKenzie, it was Cheryl Townsend Gilkes, just a plethora of women. And so that introduction just led me to read more and more who womanists were. And so I have a whole list here of womanists, but just that's my introduction, was through that church. And then during my master's degree at North Park Theological Seminary, my thesis was Reclaiming the Spirit of God in Womanist Theology. And so I used Emily Townsend, Jacqueline Grant, Kelly Brown Douglas, Teresa Brown Fry. I mean, all of these women, Stacey Floyd Brown, it was all of these women, and Dolores Williams, that I began to use their voices and highlight their voices as places of liberation. Linda Thomas, Dr. Linda Thomas is still, I believe, at Lutheran Theological Seminary in Chicago, and she became a mentor for me. And reading her work and making this larger space so that women could have access to both the intellect and the spirit. And so that's my introduction.
I realized I was on mute. So I think that's an excellent story. I am interested to know if you had women that you could name or think about when you first saw womanism or being womanish, like community mothers or other mothers, your own mother, your biological lineage. Where were those women in your experience?
So those women were my great-grandmother, descendant of the enslaved, because I always say the enslaved because we were never meant to be slaves. And so because she was a descendant of the enslaved, but watching my great-grandmother run the house in Durant, Mississippi. And then my grandmother, who worked at Cook County Hospital, and just being able to sit with her and to listen to my great aunts and their stories. My other mothers came through the church. The church mothers were really sitting at their feet, listening to their prayers, listening to their stories about liberation and the civil rights movement. And then being in seminary, didn't have a lot of mentors or role models in seminary, but I was an older student. And so I think I became the mentor because I had come out of this strong tradition. But it was really looking at the lives of Fannie Lou Hamer, studying Nannie Helen Burroughs, really digging deeply into Audre Lorde, being fascinated with the Black Panther movement and Angela Davis. And so I would say all of those women encouraged me to step out and to really do this work. So I was excited both through my family lineage, through women who just wouldn't take no for an answer. And so that became a way for me to say that this struggle is going to go on because, you know, I was standing on the shoulders of so many that that paved the way. And for women that didn't make it, I just left the memorial, the lynching museum in Birmingham, Alabama. And as I looked at the names, just the loss of our ancestors and our people meant that this work has to go on and that God has called me to this work. So I just want to shout out to all those unnamed who did not get a chance to express their liberation, to live into the moment and to see the next generation move forward.
Ashe, Ashe, Ashe. We came up with that question, and I asked that because I think, particularly for us as millennial womanists, it's really important for us to also be able to do as much pointing to our line of succession as womanists as it is to be able to claim our voice and take up our space as womanists. To be able to do both things, I think, are critically important for us. So that line of succession is as much about the inception of our womanist foremothers as it is about our great grandmothers who taught us a way of being that we now get an opportunity to fully embody with language and access that they didn't have the same privilege to. And so, you know, I would love to hear why Fannie Lou Hamer, you know, why Nannie Helen Burroughs, why Audre Lorde, you know, why were those women for you, those personal connections with their story, with their experience? What was the thing for you that feels like that was your succession line into womanist being identity and work?
So, I mean, there are so many more. So I would start with
Yes,
not just my family, but Harriet Tubman, for me, was the epitome of a womanist. She may not have identified that way, but I always thought any woman that picked up a rifle or a pistol and said, either coming or you gonna die right here, oh, that's a woman after my own heart, you know.
Right.
This is about the liberation of the people.
Yeah.
You know, it wasn't what right, but it was about moving towards freedom. And so I think Harriet Tubman is sort of the first person that I go to here on the North American shores. And then I look at Sojourner Truth, being able to know that she was just as much a woman as white women. And so I think a lot of times Black women, we get robbed of our femininity, our sexuality, our ability to be, because we are not part of this mythological or mythologized ideal of what beauty is. And so you're also in Ida B. Wells, coming out of the space of the lynching, making space to tell that truth. And so just really identifying with her story. Fannie Lou Hamer, you know, poor sharecropper's daughter, recognizing that her voice was going to be heard. And so at the 1968 convention, she spoke her truth regardless of what was happening in the country that would shut down a Black woman in public and political space. Some others were Diane Nash, coming out of the civil rights movement, getting on the bus, right, and leading students into nonviolent confrontation. And so I lift her name up because I think we are in this moment where we could truly get violent if that were the cause, but because this is a movement for us about survival and good health and really creating holistic space for our community, I lift up her name. And so many others. Audre Lorde, just a fantastic poet, but a liberation model. Alice Walker, who coins this phrase for us in ways in which that we are not stereotyped or boxed in or left out, that we can dance and move and celebrate our bodies, our color, our hair, or the lack thereof, that we could be the queens and the awesome women that not only God has created us to be, but how do we image ourselves in the way that sets us free? And so that whole dynamic, Angela Davis taking on the mantle to really be that political activist and really showing us that it is possible to be revolutionary as well as an intellectual. Toni Morrison, I just finished one of her books. Toni is so deep, sometimes I had to read her books over and over again to get a sense of her very depth that makes sense for us. She is not asking for permission to tell her story. Jacqueline Grant, you know, Black Women's Christ, Jesus, white women, you know, just the whole idea that Black women know how to worship Jesus, right? In a way that's so very different. And so loving Jacqueline Grant and that liberation womanist theologian space. Kelly Brown Douglas, my personal hero, the Black Christ. Who knew?
Yes.
Yes.
Particularly in the Black church.
Yes, in the Black church, right? So you got a Black woman writing about the Black Christ, and if that doesn't set you free, you know, we need to have a conversation.
Right.
Um,
Right.
but she had, but in her book, Stand Your Ground: Black Bodies and the Justice of God, was pivotal in my doctoral work because I became very interested in creating space for narratives that didn't start in with the enslaved. And it didn't start with slavery. Our narrative started at the creation.
Right.
And I mean the earth's creation. When women, the oldest bones found on the planet are on the continent where Black people ruled and lived for centuries. And so mitochondrial DNA, we call her Eve. And so her bones were found, and she is the mother of Homo sapiens. And so this lineage of women that give birth to the nation and move across the globe means that we have a history that stretches far back, further than our enslavement, but our liberation. And so just having that conversation with myself and with others is to trace our lineage so far back that we have to deconstruct our thinking beyond just being enslaved. But our narratives that come out of slavery and out of those who were caught in the triangle become also another space and place for us to sit. And so then we've got, Renita Weems, who gives us room to breathe. Listening for God is one of the books that we taught while I was at Trinity, and so was able to share that with others. And so that deep space where she gets to reflect on her own life and her life experience, and then share that with others, just a sister away. Renita Weems, right? So many others. I asked for intimacy. Renita Weems. So Renita Weems for me then becomes this pivotal voice in the church in ways in which she becomes very personal with her story and the liberation of Black women.
Right.
So, those, and then we move into this present moment. I had a good mentor and my own advisor, Julia Speller, who came out of Trinity. And then I met Dr. Phyllis Isabel Shepard while I was in North Park. And so just her voice became important to me. And then there was, again, Linda Thomas and Stacey Floyd Thomas and M. Sean Copeland. And so then beginning to unwrap and begin to understand the Black woman's body.
Yeah.
And how that has been shackled.
Yeah.
And how we have allowed those myths of white supremacy to define how we define ourselves as beautiful. Yeah. And so M. Sean Copeland breaks that open for us in her work. And then we have Teresa Brown Fry and Joanne Terrell, who was mentored by James Cone, becomes another pivotal voice in the Black liberation struggle. And so many. And so now in this very moment, I am reading I'm Still Here by Austin Channing, and also When They Call You a Terrorist, Black Lives Matter. And so these voices across the generations, right? We're still in the struggle, we're still here. But these become the pivotal spaces that we dig deeply into so that we are not leaving out millennial voices, nor are we leaving out the ancestral voices, but that we're trying to find that space where they are bridged. And so that's the work I am interested in and that I want to contribute to and share.
Right. Thank you for kind of walking us through how you read all of these different kinds of voices and what that means for womanist identity and social location, which I think is really, really important. And one of the things that I wanted to kind of circle back to a little bit, you spoke just a little while ago about this concept of wholeness and what that looks like, and creating that space to be able to be whole, to be able to be, you mentioned femininity, the ability to be able to kind of just be, right? And I wanted to pose a question to you. There's a part of Alice Walker's 4-part definition of womanism that has always stuck out to me. And in the second part of her 4-part definition, she talks about a womanist as someone who is committed to survival, of wholeness of the entire people, male and female. And then the line that always gets me is not a separatist, except periodically for health. And I have used that line personally when I needed to find a way to get my health back after just being a Black woman and wearing probably more hats than I should and allowing myself to get away from what it looks like to be whole. But one of the questions that I wanted to pose to you is, what do some of the conditions look like that warrant someone realizing that you might need to separate for a bit, whatever separating looks like for you, for your own health? And I pose that question because, we're in a climate where everyone's talking about self-care, everybody's talking about mental health, but a lot of times for Black women, it's not until we hit a breaking point that we realized that we needed to step aside. And so what I think is brilliant about the space that Alice Walker creates in this broad definition is allowing us to think about certain conditions where situations may warrant certain attributes of ourselves that are not typically our own. And then a follow-up question is, once you kind of learn what it looks like to need to separate for health, the follow-up is, how do you re-engage once you've gotten what you needed from that separation? How do you re-engage back into community since the Womanist is kind of committed to the community and committed to the folks and all of that? So I know that's a long lead-in, but I would just love to hear your reflection on that.
Yes. So thinking about that definition, I believe that we Black women have taken on the role of caretaking in a way that oftentimes can be detrimental, based on this historical myth that we are superwomen. But it is based on protecting our children, our sons and our daughters, and through the enslavement moment, protecting the men who would be vulnerable to lynching, including our children and ourselves. And so generationally, we have experienced this deep trauma of separation, being sold, bodies being raped and hung from bridges or trees. And so taking all of that in means that we have spent probably more time in the United States trying to protect ourselves and our people, which takes a toll. And generationally, that sort of embeds itself in the DNA. And Joy DeGruy talks about that a lot when she talks about post-traumatic slave syndrome, and the ways in which we protect our children is to say, no, he's not that smart, or she's not that good, or, you want to hold your children close because of those conditions. And so now we're moving into a space where we haven't quite healed from that trauma. And then I do remember in 2013 when I was teaching seminary course, and Michael Brown was murdered. And then Eric Garner was murdered. And then Raquel Boyd was murdered. And feeling this responsibility, not only to talk about this historical piece, but how we move into this trauma over and over again in our community. And what does that mean for us as Black women to hold space so that we can care for others, other people's children, other people's extended family? And so separation does not mean dislocation from the responsibility of coming back to community. It means that we are really taking care of our spirit and our mental capacity and our bodies, because generally we will get so involved in the activism to the neglect of being replenished.
Right.
And so nobody gives you the playbook on replenishment.
Yeah.
Usually you hit that mental space, and being, just having, sometimes if you walk around the city, wherever you live, and you see mental health, that mental health for me has meant that the Black body has not been taken care of in the way that it needs to be healthy. And so for women, it's really important for us to gather. I think one of the ways that women separate is that they come together, whether it's a girls' trip or whether it's getting on a plane this Sunday and going to St. Martin and just sitting still, watching the waves of the Caribbean wash over my feet and my body, because it is that water and that space. For me, it's ancestral. It takes me back to a space where I can be near water, I can be near the spirit, and I can hear God speaking through those waves. I can watch the double rainbow, which is like a double blessing and a double promise.
Yeah.
And so separating myself does not mean that I've left the struggle. The work that I do around racial justice is hard. It's hard work, because I'm looking at this administration tearing apart what we've been working to build since we arrived on these North American shores. And so watching our civil and human rights being dismantled means that we need to double down and triple down and gather again, right, to protect ourselves and our community. So separating doesn't mean that we've left the struggle. It just means that we need to replenish. So what I would offer in the re-engagement is that before you separate, that you make sure that you've left instructions. I'm leaving now. I need you all to pay attention to what's going on, because the strategy for our survival is in your hands until some of us return. And so I don't know if we do even well to say, I'll be gone for a little while, but I'll be back. And so if that communication, and that's, I think, across the diaspora, I would love to see Black women across the diaspora have that kind of network where they check in with one another to see how they are doing. And so I'm really intentional about when I am traveling and am in Black women's, mostly white space, because it's a majority of white people in the space. It's not their space, but because Black women are there to gather them. And so my executive minister, Tracy Blackman, posed this question at our last gathering: how are you breathing? How are you breathing? Because oftentimes what we find is that we're doing the work so tenaciously, so committed, so ravenously, that sometimes we're just not breathing. And so that moment where we can gather to talk about the reality of our lives, we are tired, we are sick and tired of being tired. And so perhaps someone in that circle is on the verge of committing suicide, but they haven't talked about it because no one's asked them how they are feeling internally. And so re-engaging means that we have spent time being together, and then really what I do sometimes is I go home on Friday, I close the door, and I don't come back out until Monday morning.
That's real.
That's real.
Right? Disengaging, turning off the cell phone, not using Facebook, staying off of the computer, and not even reading or listening to the news, so that I can gain a sense of sanity. And so re-engaging and coming back into the community whole, as a whole person, is important for us, because the work must go on. And so I'm inviting sisters from everywhere, wherever they are listening, to have some accountability partners that say, you need to leave now.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's not only are you going to hurt yourself, you're going to hurt somebody else in this world. Right?
Yeah.
And so step away, hear that. We will take care of your children. We will look after your pets. We will water your flowers. We will prune your garden, right?
Yeah.
But you need to go somewhere and dance and shake, sit or weep or shop.
Yes.
retail therapy, right?
Yeah.
That's real. I just want us to be real about how we navigate space. And so if we don't navigate away, we may not be able to find ourselves coming back. And so re-engaging means that we have to have a pathway back so that someone, even, you know, at the end, if you've been gone too long, someone picks up the phone and says, you know, I'm just checking on you. Are you coming back to us? And you can say, not ready, or I'm on my way, and I feel re-energized because we're in this for the long haul. So I hope that answers the question.
That was excellent.
You're muted. Gabby's muted. Tell her.
Maybe not. Gabby, you're still muted.
I'm sorry. Clearly I was muted and taking it all in and having my own moment. But yeah, that. I think about that differently now because of what you shared. So thank you. We wanted to make sure we left a good amount of time for you to share with us a little bit about the work that you do within the United Church of Christ denomination, and just kind of how all of your intersectionality shows up in your work and in your space.
Yes, I started with the United Church of Christ about a year ago, February 2017. I've been in higher education for about 16 years and loving theological education, and yet also working in spaces where I was able to impact seminary students in a really real way. So teaching this course called Sankofa, Racial Righteousness and Reconciliation, that dealt with what it looks like to be in the United States, to look at African-centered pedagogy from the Bible to all of those intersections: class, gender, economics, socioeconomics, sexuality, LGBTQ, all of those intersections within that course. And it was teaching that I really recognized that African-centered pedagogy was my gift, and looking at the Blackness of our text, our scripture, our story of both oppression and liberation. And so coming to the United Church of Christ, I brought all of that. And what did it mean to be culturally immersed? So I'd already moved through reclaiming the spirit of God and womanist theology. And then in my doctoral work, it was a cultural immersion as a pedagogical tool to end racism. So then I go through this whole process of learning who we were and who we are in a beginning. And so trying to look at this space of ancient text, and where the majority of the people within this text are people of color and of African descent. And so that passion grew. I got to the moment after I graduated that it was time to do this work on a larger level. And so I am faithful to the asking, and I'm also committed to the receiving. And so committed to it, yes. And so waiting for God to open that door. And so it was opened through this Minister for Racial Justice position here at the United Church of Christ. And I came to it really not knowing that the administration that had been put in place in 2017, in January 2017, was going to almost kill all of us or try to take us all out. And so it was really jumping in, diving into this work in a way that my responsibility is creating resources and opportunities for churches within the United Church of Christ to recognize that we have to do race work very different. That we are not just having conversations about race, but that we are working toward active strategies to dismantle racism. And so part of that means that I've created a curriculum that talks about decolonizing and deconstructing whiteness. And also addressing colorism within Blackness. And so ways in which we deal with our own sense of how we've been colonized. And then what do we do to deconstruct that so that our liberation goes even further? And so the work that I do here is predominantly with white churches, but it is a passion to put on the margins all humans. And in that moment, what I'm doing is I'm speaking out of my womanist, my Blackness, my education, all my intersections, and I'm creating this space that says we are going to demythologize and deconstruct this thing called whiteness, because it is not superior. I am not a minority. I'm not a second-class citizen.
Right.
You know, the way that Black women are viewed, generally when the statistics come out, we're at the bottom of every statistic, health-wise, mental health-wise, physical. And so it is really reclaiming our space of health and teaching both scripture, biblical text, from a Black woman's perspective. And then also teaching that text in a way that is culturized. What I mean by culturized is that, again, we are not, that's not a white book. That's not a
Right.
story, right? That's a people of color story.
That's a people of
And so if we're, it is a people of color story. I mean, Europe does not really appear until the latter half of right before Jesus enters that Greek and Roman moment where we began to get those stories and those characters. And so it's an African text. And so we need to recognize that. And so this work means that we need to approach it from that space of Blackness, that land of Kush, demythologizing the narrative of Ham, recognizing who our neighbors are. We're in this moment right now where we need to look at our text and the ways in which women are demonized through Western construction. And so reclaiming that. And so this work means that we are really digging deeply into making sure that the church recognizes that it is not the white church, that it's God's church.
Yeah.
And that it's the people's church. It's all people's church. It is Native church. It is Latinx church. It is LGBTQ church. It is Black women and Black men and children, immigrants. It is all of that. It is the Syrian. It is the Arab. It is everyone's church. You may not be a believer, but if you have a sense of the Spirit, call on that name. But we want to make sure that we are moving forward in that name. God has many names, and we want to reclaim them all. That's part of our liberation, right? And so this work for me is, I'm passionate about deconstructing and decolonizing. Because if we don't do that, we'll be forever stuck in the space of not owning that we are all sitting on the margins while God occupies the center of our life and our faith. And so my work here is to also look at what it means when we are talking less about white privilege and we're talking about prioritizing all humans.
Yes.
That's good. I kept wanting to take more notes. That was really, really amazing, Dr. Velda. Thank you for sharing that. I want to ask you to revisit a couple things you said. So you were talking about the importance of decolonizing and deconstructing. And so using that as a womanist method and as a womanist tool, you also talked about femininity earlier in answering one of the questions. And I'm interested to hear your thoughts about how, the myth of masculinity and just like myths around white supremacy and all of that have contributed to women being demonized through Western construction, femininity, feminine gender expression, and how those particular things have been ostracized and demonized as a part of how we've learned Christianity. And I would like to not only hear about how that has happened and how we can deconstruct and decolonize those myths, but also what would be the womanist tool to construct something healthy around femininity and embodiment and female feminine gender expression.
So, great question. So we approach this out of this Puritan ideal that white women were pure, that their bodies were sacred, that we approach text as if that we are, and you know, there's this great space where I sort of did some research around the church fathers and Aquinas and Socrates and yes, and so how the church fathers demonized women, and they used scripture to do that, right? I'd rather be a man than a dog or a female. Really? and so it gets lifted up in this white structure of Western Christian ideology, and therefore it lifts up white women as being pure, and then Black women as being beast. And so that comes out of justifying enslaving the Black body.
Right.
And so when this myth is created, which is supported by the church, the Catholic Church and the Protestant Church, the Protestant Reformed Church, codifies this in their legalizing of trading African bodies, right? And so you get women who then become objectified. And so Black women's bodies then are pieces and parts. They're not whole. And so as they're writing the science, as they're creating categories, as they're lifting up whiteness, they are demonizing and dehumanizing Black bodies. So generationally, again, we get this trauma around Black bodies and how we view our bodies, that, you know, the lighter and the brighter and that you are, colorism then comes into play, the more beautiful you are. And so when you have white men raping Black Indian, Black enslaved, and children included, and you create these mulatto children or mixed race children, and then in order to use that against other Black women or the Black community, you lift up this light-skinned person, right? And so we come to this moment where that deconstructing means that we have to reclaim Blackness. What I love is going back to some of my African sisters who picked up guns and defended their territories in Ethiopia, who were militarized, who were military women, right? That was Blackness. The Dahomey, right? Black women were defending Wakanda, or they're defending the homeland, right? So that's Black. Those are women, intellectual, strong, and strategic. That's where we have to go to reconstruct ourselves. We are not created in the image of whiteness. We are created in the image in which God created us, which was Black women. And so to reclaim that femininity means that we name our femininity. What is it that makes us sensual and sexual? And that's not defined by somebody's book. That's our own definition. What makes us beautiful? So I always, when I have, used to have students, and I would tell them, I was like, look in the mirror and tell yourself you're beautiful. You know, just to reclaim that space, because someone has written, some movies been made, some cosmetic has been put on the market, some fashion model has been lifted up as an icon of beauty, and it has not always been Blackness. And so what I loved about Black Panther was that there were all these shades of beauty, and that there was all this strength in Blackness, and that's the restructuring space. That is the reclaiming space, that no one defines who you are as a woman, regardless of how you choose to self-identify. Not your sexuality, not your femininity, not whether you wear makeup or braids or no hair or some hair, or however you choose to, whether you want to self-identify with your Caribbean roots or your Canadian roots or your diasporan roots. That's for us to decide. And so when I see, when I'm in places and someone is talking about beauty, and I'm asking them, what's beautiful?
Yeah.
Because there was beauty long before there were mirrors. And so I am sure that Black women walked around adorned in their beauty, right? Long before they were colonized to think that they should act like someone else's culture.
Right.
And so that is the way. And so I love Alice Walker's definition of we're so the embodiment of who we are is so special because we come with such a strong spirit. And so I would hope that in your generation, that not only are you reclaiming that spirit, but you embody that spirit and model it for other Black girls and Black women. And even in an older generation that grew up not having the language of embodiment, not having the language of inflection, not having the language of womanism. How do then we draw in and create that space for them? My aunt is 81 and love her to death, right? So I have to go in and say, girl, you're so pretty, right? Just gorgeous. So that even as she ages, that even in the aging process where her body has changed, but her soul and her spirit hasn't changed. And it's not beauty that we define by what we look like. It is how we carry ourselves on the inside. And so it is our grace, it is our ancestral spirit, it is our breath that makes us beautiful, it is our intellect and our heart, it's our name and sachet that makes us beautiful. And all of that creates the space of femininity, as well as ways in which we will teach our daughters how to be whole.
Yeah.
And so I hope that's helpful. And I'm going to pass that on to you and hold you all accountable for that.
Yes. I do think that's the perfect end. You know, how we will teach our daughters how to be whole, and that really is at the core of these intergenerational and interdisciplinary womanist conversations that Womanist taught us are about.
Yes.
So that is a wonderful place, actually, for us to wrap it up. Any final statements in addition to this is the work that will teach us how to keep our daughters whole?
Yes. Just, when you get up in the morning, just tell them, just be your bad self. just be bad.
I live.
Just rule the world. Every time I look at a new Black woman politician, right? Mayor, senator, governor, chief of police, we're just really, taking over, which is not a bad thing. But I would just say, the sky's the limit. There's nothing that we can't do. We can love our children. We can love our men and our sons. We can embrace them and teach them how to shed toxic masculinity. We can do that. But we do it in partnership, and we do it in community, and we model that for them. And we talk about love. We talk about tough love. We talk about discipline, not to the point where it kills us, but we do go back to a space of discipline. We teach how do we take care of our bodies? What are we eating? What are we reading? What are we watching? And so I would think paying attention to all of that in the midst of all the other things that we're doing, maybe a lot of work, but we're not doing it alone. And so whenever you need me or us or other women in the community to help you separate and then reintegrate, call me. Call us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I know we speak on behalf of everybody who's watching. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Velda, for your time, for your wisdom, for your research, for your work, and for all that you just shared. It's been wonderful to be in conversation with you today. It has absolutely been our honor. I'm speaking for myself and Gabby. Thank you. So we are going to bring this interview to a close. We also want to offer a big thanks to Reverend Melanie Jones and our wonderful sister Liz Alexander, who are the co-conveners of the Millennial Womanist Project. So we are excited about the Twitter chat that will be happening tonight. So if you want to talk to myself or to Gabby, we will be on the Millennial Womanist Twitter. So please come and join us. That's going to be at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 6 p.m. Central Standard Time. That's 4 p.m. on the West Coast for Pacific folks.
Give them all a big.
Yeah, come on out. And chat with us. Thank you for watching. Thank you for engaging with us, and continue to stay tuned because we will be coming back monthly and continuing this initiative of Womanist Taught Us in intergenerational and interdisciplinary conversations about womanism.
And can I just give a shout out? I do want to thank Liz. I met Liz last year at a General Synod and embraced her as my daughter, and then she introduced me to Melanie. So I want to actually send them a lot of love for launching Millennials for Racial Justice, which is a page on the UCC website. They launched that. They made space for me at the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference to be on the panel. And so I love them. And so whatever you all need, I'm right there, because I believe that you are going to carry this forward. So, and I want to thank Jamie. He was part of the group that I had an opportunity to interview. So the curriculum that I mentioned that I launched, that the UCC launched in April, is called Sacred Conversations to End Racism. And it is approaching, looking at how the church really does the work of deconstructing itself and its narratives around white supremacy. And so the approach is out of cultural perspectives. It is Latinx and African American and African, and so all of those spaces. And so that particular project has been really important, because I think the church really does need to take a look at moving beyond conversations on race and anti-racism training to strategies of engagement. And where it becomes an activist church. It is on the border, it is at the White House, it is at the State House, it is confronting living while Black, or living while Latinx, or living while a Black woman, right? And so Sacred Conversations is intended to do that. And so we developed a podcast. My colleague, Tracy Wispaway, and I have a podcast, a 7-series podcast where Jamie has been interviewed, and it's called Podcast for a Just World, Sacred Conversations to End Racism. It was a Lenten series, but it's still apropos for today. And we interviewed Reverend Tracy Blackman, Reverend Dr. Curtis DeYoung, and Liz, and Melanie, Liz Alexander and Melanie Jones, and Jamie, as well as somebody else. I think I was interviewed for it as well. But if you get a chance to listen, that gives you an entree into not only the work, but the ways in which we're all trying to meet these intersections and to really dismantle, disrupt, and eradicate racism. Because as Reverend Tracy Blackman says, race is not real. And that's the work that I do. It is not real. It was created. But racism is the impact, and that is real. And so ways in which this curriculum addresses that, and the ways in which the church begins to use this curriculum so that it really does become a radically different space.